I spent a lot of time in the Amazon learning and apprenticing. And this is actually a part of my journey that I never talk about because we all have a different idea of what ayahuasca is. And the truth is that in the ancient Amazonian traditions, ayahuasca is a very tiny, tiny part of an ancient tradition that goes back thousands and thousands of years. It is a medical system, an ancient medical system, a philosophy of healing. These people have an unforgotten understanding of the origins of health and the origins of disease. They're like the original custodians, pharmacists of health. So I was immersed in that, and I saw thousands of people both inside the traditional setting and outside the traditional setting, go through these experiences with ayahuasca. And I realized something right away. It is that inevitably, and I'm just using ayahuasca because a lot of people can relate to it in this day and age, and it's so inseparable from the conversation of birth. And inevitably, the way in which people relate to that experience and then interpret their experience that they have is informed by their own birth. Medicines like ayahuasca are there to bring us back into right relationship with nature, with all life. Our separation, our deep wound of separation, is cultural. It's the infant maternal separation that begins long before birth. So you separate all the babies from all the mamas, which is what's happening. How can we grow in right relationship with nature, with the earth? It isn't possible. So we are deeply out of relationship with nature. And therefore, the reasons why people are going to sit with ayahuasca and the ways that they're interpreting their experiences and so on are very, very limited. And the people that they're sitting with are not aware of the ways in which their pre- and perinatal experiences are inevitably representing in the ceremony and outside of the ceremonies. Well, this is the same in life. The way we're experiencing our world reveals our pre- and perinatal experiences. And so to get in touch with those memories, we merely need to slow down and be in the present moment to look at what is here right now and all the time. How am I experiencing my relationships? And the other thing I'll say about that and ayahuasca comes up now as well because it can be, and in a lot of cases can fuel profound healing and transformation. But look at what we have on our hands now. We have a whole millions of people that are floating in outer space and not anchored into their bodies.
Yes, this is a really, really good point. There are so many, especially Los Angeles, San Diego, Austin, many of the major cities, and I'm sure in all continents, there is just this overuse and abuse of plant medicine and the dissemination of this incredible wisdom from these other dimensions that, quite frankly, to quote Jordan Peterson, be careful of unearned wisdom. If we're not ready, if we're not spiritually mature enough to even receive the wisdom or even have the groundedness or the capacity or the space inside of our psyche, inside of ourselves to receive the infinite wisdom of these plant allies, ayahuasca being one of them, I could see it could be a cover. It could be an egoic cover for pseudo healing, the healing that seems on the outside that it's real because you're going through a peak experience, right? With the DMT and everything else. I find it really fascinating that you spent so long in the Amazon and in parts of Peru. Yes, is that where you studied? I find it so fascinating that now we're returning to this realm of nature for wisdom, but yet there has to be a program to prepare us to even receive it. Because if we go back and we try to go from the first floor of an apartment to the 15th floor in one jump, we don't have the muscle, we don't have the mindset, we don't have the maturity to be able to handle that jump. It's just so drastic of a jump. And I could see that being completely, there's a lot of corollaries in our podcast today. On one side, we have the awareness of birth and how birth was designed to be innately, sacredly, spiritually. Then we have the mechanistic model that pumps out babies through 50% or more cesareans. It's actually the same thing now from a maturity standpoint with ayahuasca and with plant medicines, where you have people that are using them in a mechanistic way. Really what I get from you is this super gear drop where we're really slowing down and we're returning back to the way that things were designed to be. And when I say to be, I just mean to be birthed in a way where there's not so much intervention. And even in corollary to plant medicine ceremonies, to be able to receive wisdom, one has to be mature enough first to receive it. I think it's the same thing with birth. And, we found it as a couple through pain. Carrie was very deep in the world of knowledge of birth, and she actually found you, and we found you through mutual friends, which was so amazing. It was like cosmic breadcrumbs that traced us back to you. So shout out to Joni Dillon and the work that she's doing in the world with Scott Jackson, because it was through that group that I think at the very same time we connected with you, Joni connected us to you as well. And then someone else you had worked with, I think it was our friends in Austin as well. So there's like 3 or 4 situations that were pointing us to you. And that's what I got from working with you. It was this slowing down to actually be able to receive the memories, maybe deep in my amygdala from when I was a child. Same with Carrie, so that we could bring in Nova, that Carrie could birth Nova and Carrie could birth Naya in the most sacred way. I think you've done a really good job of explaining where we're at as far as a society and how we look at birth and even how we look at plant medicines. I wonder now, can we turn the lens to the light? Can we bring in the luminosity? Because we're very disconnected. Cesareans are at an all-time high. The disconnection of birth, life, and death could never really be as high of magnitude as it is now, because we're in this quick pace of life where we're just trying to get the result without actually doing the real deep work. Where do we even go from here when we course correct? So we know what the darkness is because you've shared so deeply about it. How do we course correct a conscious father, a conscious mother, wanting to bring life into the world so that, let's be honest, there doesn't have to be so much suffering and the child doesn't have to do so much work in their life to get over the trauma of their birth that could have been sacred? Where do we go from there? How do you begin that nuanced conversation with your clients and with the world here on the podcast?
Yes. Well, we start with healing our own births. And what really inspired me, and just to also wrap up that piece about ayahuasca, the primary way that we need to be preparing for, if you are considering sitting with that, one of the most powerful medicines on the planet in this lifetime, then you ought to really, in the preparation, begin to ask yourself, how was I welcomed into my life? Because our conceptions were our first sexual experiences. And birth is a lifelong event. We mature lifelong. This is a lifelong maturation process. And so if those initial maturation processes were suppressed, then when we go and sit with a medicine like ayahuasca, we've got some big ass expectations on her. And that is why there's so much space for ego inflation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are primal wounds. So fast forward, if we're in right relationship with our bodies, and from that space, not because someone told us, oh, I did this on the weekend, I just went to Costa Rica, whatever, you should do this. That is not ever the right reason to do anything, ever, especially not a sacred plant medicine. If it's this deeply derived instinctual knowing, like when I went to the Amazon at 22, I was in college. Ayahuasca was not the drink of choice. I can guarantee you. Like no one was with me on that journey. That was a deeply instinctual journey. And in order to integrate those experiences into our lives, we need to go back to the birth. And basically, luminous birth is actually creating a reality where things like ayahuasca are not necessary, because it's all about keeping the consciousness intact from the very beginning of life. And the Amazon, I was up close helping with some of the most frontier scientific research on the changes in DNA expression before and after ayahuasca retreats. And all of that is looking at early childhood trauma. We know that our trauma did not begin there. So it's already right out of the gate limited. So what really inspired me on my path of serving families and going really deep into creating programs that I believed really support women and men as they transform into parents was recognizing that most of the people that I know, like if you haven't noticed, the people that take luminous birth programs are like really conscious, really aware, like people that are really invested.
They've done some work before they get to you.
Yeah, totally. And so I started to ask myself, gosh, these people are spending tens of thousands of dollars on their own personal development and inner healing of trauma. Why then are they getting to the most natural, basic life event like birth and having to endure all of the medical interventions that are there? Basically, going through the whole system that they've worked so hard to liberate themselves from. So now we have a real serious thing on our hands. I mean, I've always had an ability since a child to communicate with babies, both born and unborn. And it's very obvious to me that the consciousness that's coming onto Earth right now is really coming on purpose. It's very advanced, it's highly sophisticated, and these beings know why they're coming. They know exactly what they need, and they're choosing us to open the gateways for them. So we are consciously, beautifully conceiving these luminous beings, and then we're going through the whole gamut of medical interventions, which is quite tragic because it's a passing on then of all the trauma. So we have to realize that prenatal care has very, very, very little to do with urine analysis and blood pressure and weighing and measuring and ultrasounds and all of the things. All of those are distracting us from what is really important, which is dropping into our bodies and peeling off all of the layers so that we can come back into our true essence, our quintessential nature. That's who our children are choosing. Anything and all the conditions and the programs, the imprints, the birth imprints and the life imprints, all that shit has to go. You know, they're choosing us for who we are. Our false beliefs about whether or not we're loved, about whether or not we belong, about whether or not we are welcome in this world inform the psychoneuroimmunoendocrine development of our offspring. There's no separation between the emotional and the spiritual and the physiological. So what I would just say is, to finalize that, is we need to harness the luminous nature of birth, right? And it is designed to illuminate everything. You have God consciousness in your body, in your house, in your life. It's illuminating everything, especially the relationship stuff. The parents are the sanctuary for that being. So they're going to illuminate everything. And that is the nature, the design of birth. And if we embrace it and open with a willingness to change, then we just step into claiming the transcendent nature of birth and life.
Hey, don't go anywhere. Now that you're here, let me say thank you for being a part of this podcast. Click any of the buttons on this screen, here or anywhere, because these are specifically matched episodes that you'll really love based on what you just saw. Just tap one of these buttons on the screen, and while you're at it, subscribe to the podcast.